Hi everyone! Today we're going to have an audio lecture since I am on sophomore retreat. What I'd like you to do is keep really careful track of any questions you might have about the material. Write them down on a separate piece of paper. We can go over them then when I come back to class. Also, if you hear any weird noises, it's because right now Martha is attempting to move her entire food bag to the door, and I don't know why. So we're working on that. Today we're going to sum up some stuff from last class and then move on back to the political realm, Martin Van Buren and William Henry Harrison, and then moving into the Mexican-American War. This is it's called possibly the first real battle of the Civil War, and it happens way before the Civil War actually begins. So the sub is going to pass out your chronology sheet for the Mexican-American War. Hi, Athena. For the Mexican-American War, and hang on to it, put it in your chronology portion. I would have it out, though, while this lecture goes on, so you can keep referencing back. Last class, we were talking about the first age of American reforms, and it's important to remember that all of that was going on while the Van Buren presidency and even the end of Jackson's presidency is going on, and it's going to continue going right until the eve of the Civil War, and the Civil War is going to interrupt it. We have some successes and failures, and the slavery movement, the anti-slavery movement in itself, ultimately is going to be a success because with the end of the Civil War, we have the end to slavery, but it is going to be the Civil War that is going to finally settle that issue. Going into the next sort of phase of history, we're going to be talking about how slavery becomes the central issue in the nation, where all the other issues, all the other problems in society overlap with it, and slavery becomes the issue that has to be solved for all the other issues to be solved. So just keep that in the back of your mind while we're going forward. But on the political realm, we left off with Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson is going to, he's not going to run for re-election for a third term, and instead he's going to try to play kingmaker to Martin Van Buren. Remember, John C. Calhoun had been hoping to have that position, but because of all of Calhoun's missteps, he's going to be forced to resign, and Martin Van Buren is going to become the new they're going to try to have him inherit Jackson's legacy. He is an example of how a sitting VP becomes president. He had only pulled off the election with the help of Andrew Jackson, and he is going to be a real victim of John Adams syndrome. Remember, not a real syndrome, but when a very competent person follows behind an extremely popular president. The Whigs are going to try to defeat him in 1836 by running several candidates, but Van Buren is going to triumph again with that help of Andrew Jackson. There were 760,000 popular votes for Van Buren and 170 electoral votes in the Electoral College. When he gets into office, though, he is going to inherit economic problems, the Panic of 1837. Remember that Jackson had made it worse by his economic policies, and now he is going to be blamed for it, even though it wasn't his fault at all. He was actually a fairly competent president, and the Democrats are going to renominate him in 1840. However, they were pretty sure that he wouldn't be reelected. So you might ask then, why bother nominating him? Well, they didn't have a better candidate. It also makes the party look very bad if you go and dump the leader because you don't want to admit that you'd made a mistake. That's, I think, what it really boils down to. This would be like in the last election if the Democratic Party had decided to dump Obama and say, oops, we should have nominated Hillary instead. It would have very much undermined the credibility of the Democratic Party. And in this case, it's not really apples to apples because Obama's an enormously popular president. So the Whigs were going to try to run multiple candidates in the election of 1836 to split the vote, but it didn't work. Now in 1840 they're going to nominate one candidate, and the Whigs are going to run what's called the log cabin campaign. And this is the first modern presidential election, and it's part of an ongoing shift that we see that comes with the second generation of government. The emphasis becomes on selling the personality of the candidate. They're going to try to dress up William Henry Harrison as the average guy, farmer, and the common man. Who does that sound like? Andrew Jackson. So William Henry Harrison was portrayed as this average guy, a farmer, even though he was amazingly wealthy. He had been a war hero of sorts in the War of 1812. We watched some of that in our video, but he wasn't that big. He was definitely not as big as Jackson. William Henry Harrison was one of the first families of Virginia, just a very, very elite, old group of people. And he's going to run this log cabin campaign, this emphasis on being the average guy. And what happens is there's going to be 1.3 million popular votes for Harrison, and 234 to 60 votes in the Electoral College. So that is a pretty big win. And what happens is that we've now created a new pattern for American history. We dress up a candidate to look like Jackson, and look what happens. Success. The presidency of William Henry Harrison, though, was unfortunately not very successful. He is going to die of pneumonia 1 month into office. He gave the longest inaugural address in history. It lasted 2.5 hours, and it was bitter, bitter cold that day. It seems likely that that just made any underlying issue he'd had, health issue worse, and he's going to get pneumonia. He gave his address on March 4th and died April 4th. He was only 68, and he had this sort of very brief, very short history. And this is going to be in 1831, and we're going to get 3 presidents in 1 year. We had Van Buren, who was on his way out, Harrison, and then we're going to get a man named John Tyler. Tyler is going to become the new president. He had been Van Buren's running mate, and we are going to face a minor constitutional crisis. Is he actually the president? Does the vice president actually become president of the United States when the president had died? This had actually never happened before, so the issue was, is he the president or acting president? The Constitution is actually ambiguous on this issue. However, Tyler insisted he was president, and basically everyone went along with it. So once again, we have someone setting a precedent. The Whig plan was actually to let Henry Clay run the country from Congress and Daniel Webster run things as Secretary of State. If they had known what a strong president Tyler would become, they never would have supported his run as vice president. So here's the thing. Tyler only became a Whig for the election. He soon shows that he had been elected on a Whig ticket, but he's still a Democrat, and he still thinks like a Democrat. So he's basically only a Whig in name, so that means he is a Whig nightmare. He is going to get into office, and essentially all the Whigs around him realize they'd elected a Democrat. The Whigs hold a meeting, and they actually officially throw Tyler out of the Whig Party, and he becomes a president without a party. He is basically powerless because the Democrats aren't going to adopt him. They're mad at him. He had ditched them, and now the Whigs have kicked him out of the party, and if you are going to be a president, you really do need a political party. One of Tyler's biggest accomplishments is actually going to be settling the Maine boundary dispute. Basically, there was a problem. Where was the border between the United States and Canada? And in 1891, Britain thought that it would be very handy to build a road, and we thought that they were building it on our land. So Daniel Webster had to go negotiate with a man named Lord Ashburton. We still hated the English, and we are going to dispute about 12,000 miles of land. So here's the boundary that Britain was claiming. Here's the boundary that Britain was claiming, and this is what the boundary was going to become. So, interestingly enough, Ashburton married an American woman, and because of this, he had an inclination to be nice to the Americans, and surprisingly, Daniel Webster gets up there, and he and Daniel Webster are going to hit it off and become pals. But there was a map problem, like when they get down to business, and the British map showed that the disputed land belonged to them, and the American map belonged to us. So ultimately, because these two guys were able to be so friendly, they are going to be able to sign the Webster, or create the Webster-Ashburton Treaty that later becomes the law. Britain is going to get the piece of land they want to build their road, and then we decide to fix the border at the 49th parallel of the Louisiana Purchase. We ended up getting the richest iron deposits in the world, but nobody knew it at the time. And as soon as they signed the treaty, Webster resigned because he absolutely hated Tyler. So right now I want you to take a minute and refresh yourself, look back at your notes and write down if you have any questions. That keeps flipping forward. Write down if you have any questions, and this is going to be the end of sort of the first part of the lecture, and then I'm going to have a new video for you all about the Mexican-American War. Basically, the computer can only handle so much data at a time.